Hey there. Today I want to talk about the third path I've been mentioning to building your own livelihood. And this path is not only wanting to start your own business, but to completely or to significantly change what it is that you're doing from your current career path. Now, this is the one that I have the most experience with because this is exactly what I did. I went from 20 years in an engineering career to starting a writing and consulting business for marketing writing. Initially, when my plan was to build that slowly and then eventually transition to once I had proved the model and built up clientele and knew that if I left a full-time job, I could backfill with enough clients to make things work. So that was my plan, but I knew, that I would be switching into marketing writing. And I then got laid off and completely changed what I was doing. And so initially, when I was considering writing, I knew I wanted to do like a business to business writing. That was the kind of thing I was going into, but I was resistant to the idea of kind of staying in the field that I knew, doing writing. I mean, not doing engineering and not doing the project management that I was used to, but rather doing the writing. But I didn't want to start in a technical field or doing that kind of stuff. Part of me, part of it, I think, was I was feeling so burned by getting laid off that I was sort of just shoving all of that aside. But after some reflection, I realized, well, and there's a lot of recommendations to do that. I mean, it makes sense to start where and then you can always change. None of these decisions that you make early on have to be permanent. They have to move you forward. I mean, that's why you want to make decisions, but just to move forward, that nothing that you're doing really is getting carved into stone and is something that can't be adjusted later, or completely abandoned if you really decide you don't like it. And so, initially I resisted, but then when I finally launched, I decided that I would at least start writing in a field that I knew. And so that happened to be telecommunications. And I got my first clients through people that I knew, and then built it that way. And then as I grew and was able to prove that I could do it, because it is easier to start something very different if you're kind of at least, in adjacent. I mean, that's why they call it a pivot rather than like something whole hog. So that even though although I guess nobody ever calls it a whole hog, at least not when you're changing careers, but that's the idiom that popped into my head. But anyway, I was changing something pretty drastically, going from engineering to writing, and I knew that was going to take some justification or some explanation. And so it was easier to explain that because I did do a lot of writing as an engineer in the fields that I did. I just didn't do it in this particular way. So, but it was just an easier, for me, sell. I felt more comfortable doing that. You can certainly, if you're comfortable, going completely different, because a lot of things that you are interested in doing or are capable of doing, you've probably done throughout your career. You just haven't really thought of them that way. And there's a lot of ways to make what you've done before translate into something else. As long as you're thinking about it the right way, and you can explain it. It's just that for me, my confidence was higher, at least speaking the same language broadly, but with a kind of a bit that they didn't have, because a lot of engineers or marketing writers don't want to write. Or marketing professionals aren't taught to write, which was actually something I didn't know. I thought marketing degrees just kind of included writing, but they don't. It's an area of business. It's not, the writing itself is something different. So I brought something to the table, but also had that, that insider knowledge that made it a little bit easier start. I knew I didn't want to stay in it for that long, but I did it for a while. And in fact, I did it for longer than I had planned on doing it, and to the point where at the end of that first year, I was doing okay, but I was like, this is not, I'm not enjoying this like I should be enjoying, you know, working for myself and building something that I'm happy with. So that's when I started looking at other ways to change my business and what I wanted to focus on. And you know, I was able to use the connections that I had made and the relationships that I had built, and you know, my like testimonials and work with people to show that not only, you know, was I was capable of doing what I was doing, but I could also then start to switch that to this way, because then I could translate the writing for this is not that different from writing for that. So it was kind of this progression to get to where I was going. And then ultimately, I decided, or I realized that where I thought I wanted to go with writing wasn't really where I wanted to go, that I was much more excited about the idea of helping women get what I had been able to build for myself, which was a business that works for my life and allows me to, you know, take my son to therapy and go to his parent teacher conferences and not feel guilty about, you know, taking time off to go to something, or asking permission to take time off to go to something, or even leaving on time and feeling guilty about that. So that is one path. If I were able to do it again, I don't know, because if it's coincidentally, in timing of these, yesterday I talked about that feeling of my younger self, like that kind of that arrogance of like, of course I can figure this out. But that also came with the sweet spot that I happen to be in, that I now know is a lot of it has to do with my ADHD, like that sort of that crisis mode that triggers like the dopamine, and you know, like I can really get focused and I can maintain focus for a long time when I've got this like I don't know, it's like clicks and you get into that flow for a while. And so being forced into that position where I had no choice but just, I mean, basically you get thrown in the deep end and it's either sink or swim, and you know, the instinct to survive kicks in, and I always figure out how to swim. So in hindsight, I always would have thought I preferred like the slower like lessons in swimming, but it's always been my experience that when I get thrown in, that's really when I do my best, because I have no choice. And I guess what really happens is I don't have enough time to overthink things, which is something that I am very likely to do. So in hindsight, while I thought I wanted to build something on the side, I think that the security of my regular position, my regular job, and not really needing to do it, it would have been something that I just kept putting off until it got to a point where there wasn't like I couldn't put it off anymore. Like I had no choice. And it's funny how many times that I've looked back on things that have happened in my life, and I realize that whether I know it or not, I've kind of put myself in that situation to, you know, not even always put myself into that situation. Sometimes it happens. Like nobody knew that the person who was mentoring me was going to get deployed and not be able to train me. But there have been other situations where I realized that probably somehow deep in my brain, I was setting things up so that I would have no choice but to make a change. And that's just kind of where I go, and I do my best. But so anyway, that's one way, is to just completely dive in the way that I did. If that's the way you work, that might be something you want to do, but that's a big commitment, and it's a big risk. But again, if you figured out that that person that you used to be, who used to not worry about those risks and know that you can figure it out, I mean, it's true. You can figure everything out. If you look back, I mean, I don't know who has said it. I'm sure lots of people have said it. You've survived everything that's happened to you thus far, and probably less of that stuff is big and worth celebrating that you got through it. And you probably thought at some point you weren't going to get through it. So so yeah. So the third path is doable. You can go completely jump in and not only start a new business, but do something completely outside of what you're doing. But that would be, I imagine, a little bit more of a struggle. You have a little bit more to figure out. But once you start building traction, I mean, that's the hardest thing. Once you get that momentum going, it's often, it's exciting. And then you can kind of keep going. So you might have a little bit more of a push at the beginning, or, to have to get to that point. And, maybe if your circumstances are what they are, you'll get really creative about getting that work that you need. But it's totally doable to start something new and start it on your own and have it be a success. Just because you don't have a block of experience in the thing that you think you need to have experience in doesn't mean that you can't make your life work by the skills that you have. You just have to think about them in a different way. What I did was I pointed out all of the ways that what I used to do was similar to what I was wanting to do now. And it really wasn't any different. It wasn't different. Writing persuasively was not any different than me going into meetings and persuading people that the project that we were working on was to the benefit of the community or to whoever the stakeholder was. Communicating with all of the different stakeholders on any project was not any different than communicating to to your stakeholders or your investors. So there's a lot of ways to draw parallels to what you already have experience with. And that's one of the things that I find very fun about working with people is seeing what those connections are, because it's very hard sometimes to make those connections ourselves. And so one of the things that in fact, there's a lot of things that it's challenging to do for ourselves because we self-censor. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite tips to help you get through that. And it's great because it involves a buddy. And so you can always make it fun if you want to have a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or whatever and chat with a bestie. That's one of the best ways to do it. And so I will talk about that next. And thanks for listening. And if you would like to subscribe to get notification of the next one, please do. And share and comment below on what you've got going on and what you're thinking about. I'd love to read it. Thanks.